here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back in to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. A couple weeks hiatus after the Super Bowl, well-deserved, and Pat and I are ready to dive back in. Although it's the off season, it's been busy. We got quarterback palooza as far as free agent signings and trades and contracts, and the effects that's going to have on all the position players, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends is pretty monumental for this off season because there's some big names moving around and staying at home but losing their players, and this is really when you start to see how this is going to affect the draft, and then down the road how it's going to affect all of our fantasy drafts come April, May, June, July, August, and so forth. Pat, welcome back, man. How you doing?
Good, man. I'm glad that it's funny that we jumped into fantasy football and podcasting and all that stuff. Not jumped into fantasy football. We've been doing this for a while, but jumped into the podcasting this year. And I was actually talking to my wife earlier. I was like, this has got to be the craziest offseason I can remember. And I don't know if it's because I'm paying more attention to it now this year than I ever have, or if it really is just, there's just so many, like you said, quarterback moves, so many, there's big name wide receivers moving, it's just there's been a lot going on. And I actually wanted to jump on and do this earlier, but it seems like even just today, getting ready for this show, I put the podcast doc together, and literally like hours before we started, I sent it out, and then I had to revise it because there's so many more moves being made that it's just really hard to keep up with everything. So what we're going to do today is we're going to hit you with the quarterback moves. We feel like obviously the quarterbacks sort of dictate a lot of the production in fantasy football, obviously, being that they touch the ball on pretty much every play. So we're gonna hit those today, and we'll get you a little bit more in tune with some of the other position moves, maybe with our podcast in a couple weeks. But for tonight, we're gonna hit the big guns and the quarterbacks. And in order to do that, we decided to bring on a guest. Thank you for coming on, Hutchinson Brown. He is the host of the Young Fantasy Mind Football Podcast. He's also a writer for Dynasty League Football and a content creator for Football Guys. You can follow him on Twitter at TYFM NFL. It's the Young Fantasy Mind NFL on Twitter. Hutchinson Brown, thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate it.
I'm super excited to have be on this podcast. Sorry. And I'm glad you didn't get the handle wrong because a lot of people do. Take it slow and you'll get it right.
Well, I figured out what it was after I read it a few times.
Yeah, a lot of consonants there. You're good. Don't worry.
Yeah, Pat Sajak would be appalled by that, but that's okay. Yeah. Luckily, I'm a different Pat. All right. So, as much as we'd love to shoot the crap with you here and get to know you a little bit better, I feel like we have so much to talk about. And I know that you are, from following you on Twitter and having some interaction with you, I know that, you're just as anxious to talk about this stuff as we are. So what do you guys say we jump right into it?
Absolutely. Let's get rolling.
All right. So we're going to start with Russell Wilson. Wilson was the first, I think, big move to happen in the offseason. Obviously, he was traded to the Denver Broncos. That deal was Wilson and a fourth-round pick this year to Seattle. Seattle got a boatload of players and picks for this. Defensive lineman Shelby Harris, Noah Fant, the tight end from Denver. Also, Drew Lock came across in that trade, as well as 5 other draft picks, 3 this year, and then a first and a second in 2023 as well. So to say that Denver I think Denver got the best haul of any team as far as traded quarterback in this offseason so far. And I think they really set themselves up for success in the future. Obviously Denver had the pieces already there, to compete. They just needed somebody at the quarterback position. So, they were willing to basically sell out and trade the farm to get Russell Wilson and hopefully compete in that stacked AFC West. So Scott, I know that you are not the biggest Russell Wilson fan, but I feel like even you can appreciate what the Broncos did here on this one.
Yes and no. I mean, again, no slight on Russell Wilson. Giving away lock, you kind of helped yourself out probably a little bit. Noah Fant seemed like the odd man out compared to Albert Ogwe Bunum, who I think is, going to end up probably benefiting a lot from having Russ on the team. The 5 draft picks are kind of helping Seattle reload and rebuild, and not every move's finished. We don't know what they're going to do, but seeing him on a Denver team that looked promising, but really it was the quarterback play that limited them. You had Bridgewater, who didn't look horrible, was passable, and then got hurt. And again, Drew Lock has just struggled for the most part throughout his career. You're giving him weapons probably of a similar caliber to an extent. I mean, Judy, Sutton, we mentioned the tight end. You have Javonte Williams there. Tim Patrick, who is quietly one of those waiver wire darlings. And then obviously whatever they possibly maybe add in free agency. I mean, I think that, the honeymoon phase should be good. Their offensive line's always been solid in Denver, so that should keep him upright. Maybe he doesn't have to cook as much. Maybe he could get the groceries ready and kind of be utilized in a situation like that. But overall, I think it's a good move for him. But at the same time, when, there was talk of him going to the Eagles or a couple other teams, at the age that he's at, and if he's looking to extend his legacy more than anything, I take it with a grain of salt. It's a tough division right now with, obviously, you got Mahomes, you got Justin Herbert, who looks like maybe the best of the group, and Derek Carr, who's, a little underrated. And now, there's a reunion with a former teammate who looks to be maybe taking that offense to that next level. It's probably going to be the most competitive division, I think, maybe pound for pound. It's just a matter of, did they give up too much to get him? And if they don't hit that window before it closes, it's going to be a little tough to justify. So hopefully they have something going on with that, but it remains to be seen. And again, he's still an elite level quarterback. Hutch, what do you feel?
I think Denver is really just pushing all the chips in like LA did last year and saying, you know what, we're going all in. Russell Wilson's going to win us a Super Bowl. And it really looks like they're going to be competitive in this division. I know this division has Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, and a lot of great players and a lot of great teams here. But I just don't see a world where they're not competing in this division. They have a stellar offense now with Russell Wilson, Javonte Williams, and maybe Melvin Gordon if they do re-sign him. They have Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, Alberto. Like, they just have so many amazing pieces on this team now. And for fantasy-wise, like, all of them get just a ginormous boost with Russell Wilson. I mean, in fantasy, we want to target players that are alongside amazing quarterbacks. Like, as you see a lot of the breakout fantasy players, you see a lot of those top guys, a lot of them are with great quarterbacks and great offenses. And I mean, the Broncos offense has been dealing with terrible quarterback play for a while now. And all these guys get a huge boost now that Russell Wilson's going to be the quarterback.
Yeah. And I think that Denver, they've been slowly building that defense for the last few years. And I feel like, obviously, Denver is, as you both probably know, Denver is actually for sale. The ownership group there is selling the franchise. And I think that, what better way to sort of add value to what you're selling than to, add a guy like Russell Wilson and potentially take that franchise to, to another Super Bowl. So I think that it was a really smart move on their part. I think, like Scott said, we will see if they paid too much. I think if they get a Super Bowl victory out of it, I don't think that you can consider what they gave up too much. But if they just sort of hang around, compete in that division and make the playoffs, but don't really win another Super Bowl, then that argument will continue to be had probably years into the future, because giving up that many draft picks and that many decent players, that can definitely hurt you moving forward. So Denver is, like you said, Hutch, they're pushing all the chips in here, and it really needs to work out for them in order for them to, to not have to look back and realize that, maybe it was a mistake to give that much away. But you need a quarterback in this league. And that's why we're doing this podcast specifically on the quarterback position, because it obviously is the most important position in the NFL. So the next guy we're going to talk about is Aaron Rodgers. He was not traded. He just decided to come back to Green Bay, signed a new 3-year, $150 million deal.
4-year. Yeah, it was a 4-year, $200 million deal. I think 153 was guaranteed, but I think over the next 3 years, 153 is
guaranteed.
It's going to go. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
Crazy.
Thank you.
So he could buy the Broncos. Cool.
Yeah, he could buy the Broncos.
So when he first re-signed with Green Bay, it just seemed like business as usual. All the same pieces were going to be there. They had franchised Devontae Adams, and you just kind of thought, okay, that Packers moving forward, I'll be drafting Adams as a top 3 wide receiver next year, and Aaron Rodgers is probably a top 6 or 7 quarterback. And then all of a sudden, the big trade happened with Devontae Adams, and I know we're trying to stick a little bit more to the quarterbacks in this episode, but I feel like you can't really talk about Aaron Rodgers without talking about Devontae Adams. It's been so many years of the two of them together, just owning the NFC North. So what do we think about the Rodgers fantasy value going forward, not knowing where, what kind of receiving weapons he's going to have on the offense this year? Hutch, I'll let you jump in on this one first. How do you feel about that?
I mean, right now, I'm working on some 2022 rankings. I have them worked out. I haven't posted them yet, but I'm working on them. Right now, Rodgers is statted out as my quarterback 13. I don't even value him as a top 12 quarterback at this point. And I mean, when they bring in a Julio Jones or a Tyler Lockett, even if they go for a trade, that will definitely rise into the top 12 again. But without Devontae Adams, I just don't see a top 6, maybe even top 8 finish for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, those two have just been connected for so long. They've just had a dominant stretch together. And, the receiver doesn't make the quarterback, but Rodgers has certainly been helped in his career by Adams. I just don't see a world where Rodgers steps back in that elite category without Adams there.
Yeah, I think with Rodgers, it's funny because I've been sort of going back and forth in my head, because before Devontae Adams was, the guy, he played alongside of, other receivers in Green Bay who have all been pretty fantasy, relevant or productive, if you will. Guys like Jordy Nelson, guys like Randall Cobb, there's going even further back when, sort of when Brett Favre sort of ceded the job to Rodgers, they've always sort of had someone step up. And I'm kind of curious, like you said, who's that's going to be, if they're going to trade for somebody or potentially draft, a rookie in the first round. It's very interesting to me. I do believe that Rodgers is good enough to make a good wide receiver very good for fantasy, but it's a matter of, are they going to get a really good wide receiver? What do you think is going to happen with that, Scott? I'm interested. I know that you are the king of, these outlandish trade ideas that somehow always seem to come to fruition somehow. What do you see?
Because it follows me into fantasy, because I'm usually a nut when it comes to trading too, but we won't go there. No, all kidding aside, and I mean, both you guys know for years the joke has been that they didn't really get him help through the draft, so to speak.
They never know.
Yeah, you have 2 first-round picks for them this year, 22 and 28. Obviously, you have a slew of wide receivers coming out of college that are all considered, it's one of the deeper drafts. Whether they package those 2 and trade up to get one of the more dominant guys, or wait for like a Treylon Burks, who's a 6'3", 232, almost could be a guy to maybe fall in line with that. The wide receiver from Ohio State also is pretty solid. Drake London's high up there. I know he's coming off injury. Yeah, if they don't do it this year, then it's just basically a slap in the face. But it's also, hey, we're paying you that money, so make these guys better. Looking at their current roster of wideouts, you got Alan Lazard leading the group, Amari Rodgers, a second-year player, and then you got Juwan Winfrey, Randall Cobb on his list, like Malik Taylor. They have to do something. I think the corollary to this, and maybe you guys agree, is that you would think, at least between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, who I kind of liked a little better, I think they're going to get a boost. I mean, I got to think that even if they do draft a rookie, they're not going to force Rodgers. He's going to do his thing. He's accurate. Everybody loves him, but he does that, 22 for 28 a game. If they get into the backfield more, he relies on those guys a little bit more, even for dump offs and screens. Maybe Tanya comes back a little bit healthy. I know the rookie they had last year, or second-year player, DeGuerro, had a little action at tight end. But they're going to have to draft somebody. I mean, there's no way. That would be make them the laughing stock of the league if you have 2 first-rounders, a deep wide receiver pool, and do that. Now, a free agent, maybe they take a shot, like you said, maybe a Julio, maybe Odell, or they go somewhere possibly a little cheaper and just look for somebody with hands, like a Jamison Crowder or or the Auden Tate that's out there at 25 that everybody thought was going to be a solid wide receiver, but he's been behind people. Maybe they take a shot on that to develop somebody, but yeah, they're going to have to draft somebody. There's no way.
Yeah, they could, but I also honestly, if I were the Packers right now, I'd be calling the Seattle Seahawks about DK Metcalf because they're having a lot of reports saying that they could trade him, and they have 2 first-round picks. I honestly would think that I would be calling the Seahawks looking for potentially trading for DK Metcalf and just get an alpha wide receiver 1. But I think they could also approach it like bring in a Julio Jones or an OBJ and then draft like a Chris Olave in the back of the first or Jahan Dotson and just have those 2 guys there and just work with that. Because I feel like, signing Rodgers this big of a contract for a few years, and, these are his last years of his career. Like, he's getting older. Like, the Packers need to win a Super Bowl now. Like, they're not looking to develop a wide receiver. So I feel like the smart move for the Packers would be go for a veteran as their wide receiver 1 rather than just get a rookie, because that you'd be wasting a year trying to develop this rookie wide receiver.
Yeah, you definitely have to have somebody who could come in and play. And I don't think there's a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson. I think there's good wide receivers.
There's not. Yeah. Because I feel like a lot of people in fantasy this year are going to try to like make one of these new receivers the next Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, and it's not going to work out because that was Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Like, those were elite prospects coming out of college. Like, these guys, they are great, but they're not Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. So we should be very cautious if we're going to start drafting receivers, these new receivers higher.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the buzz because of the last 2 years and how great those guys were. I think you're absolutely right. And I think especially whoever Green Bay drafts, I can already see they're going to go too high in fantasy drafts come August. But I mean, that's the name of the game. You're trying to roll the dice, I guess. But it's going to be interesting. I think you're absolutely right. I think the Packers are definitely in a win now, mindset, and they're going to have to do something. There's still some guys out there. I've heard Jarvis Landry to the Packers makes sense since he was released. He's a really reliable guy. Aaron Rodgers loves guys with that don't drop passes, and Landry's got great hands. So there's a lot of options, but I think that the fact that their goal is to win a Super Bowl within the next 3 or 4 years while they still have Rodgers, because there's no reason to bring him back and sort of go through all of that salary cap, minutia that they're going to have to deal with over the next few years. And if they're not, competitive and attempting to win a Super Bowl. So.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, so let's move to a team who probably won't be competing for the Super Bowl. At least none of us hope so. The Washington Redskins acquired Carson Wentz through trade.
Well, the Commanders now.
Oh yes, you're right. I'm sorry. The Washington Commanders. I still can't get that. They've been the Redskins for so long in my brain. It's going to take me probably 2 years before, and then they'll probably change the name because Commanders is terrible anyway. But
we're already calling them the commies. So yeah, all right. It's just ironic. Yeah, go figure.
I've heard that one.
So the Commanders get Carson Wentz. They get a 2022 7th round pick, and they swap 2nd round picks with the Indianapolis Colts, who also get a 2022 3rd rounder, number 73 overall, and then a 2023 3rd rounder, which could turn into a 2nd rounder if Wentz plays 70% or more of the snaps in Washington. So, we're Eagles fans here. I know, me personally, my love for Carson Wentz that 2017 season was 90% Carson Wentz. And then, unfortunately he did get hurt and Nick Foles sort of took the team to the promised land and won that Super Bowl. But I felt like coming back the next season, I really felt like Wentz was going to sort of pick up where he left off. And I'm not really sure what happened or where that sort of, fork in the road happened for Carson Wentz, but he just didn't seem like the same guy. He definitely didn't seem to be in that 2017 form this past year when he played in Indianapolis. And I think that Washington's doing what they need to do to get their offense kickstarted a little bit. They went the Ryan Fitzpatrick route last year. That obviously didn't work out with his injury, but do you really feel like, did either of you guys feel like Carson Wentz is the answer for Washington, or do you think this is just you think maybe they, are planning on drafting a quarterback or I don't know. It just, to me, it doesn't seem like this move was imperative because they feel like they can compete right now, but maybe they do. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like this is just a replacement right now. And then in 2023, when they're a horrible team, because I really don't think they're going to be competing in this division, even if it's a horrible division, they're going to be a pretty bad team, probably have a top 10 pick in the draft. And since that 2023 quarterback class is looking pretty amazing right now, I think they're going to start looking at a quarterback there. But yeah, this offense, I feel like because Carson Wentz is not like, we saw him we saw him in Philly with his 2017 season play with Frank Reich, and everyone, when he was going to Indy, saying, oh, reuniting with Frank Reich, he could be that guy again. And he wasn't. He just really did not play well. And if Frank Reich can't fix Carson Wentz, nobody can. I mean, the Colts were literally begging teams to try to trade for him. Like, they clearly stated, like, they do not want Carson Wentz on their team. He's clearly a locker room cancer, and he's just a problem. So I feel like this offense this year, people are going to try to say that Carson Wentz is going to move the needle for these guys, and Carson Wentz is going to, for Terry McLaurin and Tony Gibson, and he's just not, because he's not that caliber of a quarterback. So I think he's disappointing this year, and the Washington Commanders draft a quarterback, and then he's just kind of a bench guy for the rest of his career. I hate to say it, but he's just broken.
I mean, look, I was a big fan of the Bronco. I will go there. I was LTBB, if you're a WIP listener, for forever. The story that got me this offseason was hearing that during 2017, 2018 Super Bowl run, when supposedly he was injured, obviously, and now for the season, and basically had made comments to other injured players about not – the way they made it out to be was that he basically was mad, jealous, whatever, that the team was successful without him, to the point where there was basically almost a fight or an argument, and again, it's a he said, she said, it's a story, but hearing the locker room stuff is one thing. Now, he'll fit right in Washington, where that's a train wreck. Obviously, we've seen that for years. The stadium's bad, the team's bad, the ownership and whatnot. As a player, as a fantasy football player, like, for instance, in our league of record, we do NFL.com with some basics for quarterbacks. We do 6 points a touchdown. So it's like he was QB 12 in our league. His stats wise, he's going to get you home. And I mean, seeing what he did and didn't do in Indy was, they were Jonathan Taylor led, and then, they did make the playoffs, obviously, and it seemed like they wanted to move away from him. But he's not going to elevate Terry McLaurin, who, again, in our league was wide receiver 25. He's not going to put him in the top 10, but he's probably a little bit stronger than Taylor Heineke as long as he stays healthy, and as long as they still continue to do the ground and pound dynamic duo with, J.D. McKissick came back and Gibson's healthy. Maybe Logan Thomas is there, and that our division, the NFC East, that we'll call it our division because we're all Eagles fans. It's always there for the taking. I mean, Dallas just can't get out of their own way, and no matter what happens. And, the Giants quietly could end up building a little bit of a team now that they got rid of a high school football coach. And now you're looking at this team in Washington with Wentz. He gives you a little bit with his legs. Although they're horrible interceptions when you see them in highlights, he doesn't throw a ton of picks, but they're game enders, some of them. I don't think he's going to make them light years better, but he is an improvement on Heineke. And yeah, basically a placeholder. And he's got to wise up and know that at this point in his career, this is probably your last shot to be a starter. Because if you screw this up and don't even make that team 500, which 500 can get you in the playoffs, then yeah, he's basically just going to ride pine and maybe early retirement. He's going to cash in. He's got his money. He's good. And he's got his ring technically. But yeah, if he wants to be a starter and grow up and understand how football really works, then this could be the last real opportunity for him. But making players better around him, yes, compared to Heineke. But yeah, he's not going to make anybody elite top 10. Now, if he stinks, maybe they lean on Gibson a little more. Suddenly he's just thrust into that borderline bell cow with McKissick. And those two guys end up being both top 20s just based on the offense. That's the only factor, but it's not to his benefit. It's to his detriment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's definitely an upgrade. I do agree with that, but he's definitely not a guy who, I'm going to, last year I was big on Carson Wentz and, maybe a little of that had to do with being an Eagles fan and sort of hoping that he would go to Indy and be good. But even though I sort of wanted it in my heart. I think I maybe was a little bit blind to the reality that maybe he's just not as good of a quarterback as I believed that he was. And I guess we'll find out. I mean, like you said, Scott, he's got one more shot, and if he steps up and plays well and earns keeping his job, then good for him. But if not, I do agree that Washington will probably be looking for a replacement either in the draft or, who knows, what'll happen next offseason.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Mitchell Trubisky was recently signed as well by the Pittsburgh Steelers, a 2-year deal worth $14.2 million. Trubisky's one of those guys who I felt like I didn't get to see long enough to really be able to tell. He had some really good games, some highlight plays. I think that the one playoff game that he brought the Bears to, he played pretty well in that game, and it sort of seemed like this guy could actually be something moving forward, and then played a really bad season the following year, and Chicago just decided to sort of move away from him. As far as him playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers now, we all saw Ben Roethlisberger last year. He was definitely not, the Ben Roethlisberger from 2015. He was old. He was very immobile. Not that he was ever mobile before that, but he couldn't move around. He had one of the lowest average depths of target or passes in the NFL last year. I feel like saying Trubisky is an upgrade over Roethlisberger feels sort of, like blasphemy, but I think at the point in Roethlisberger's career where he was, I feel like Trubisky, being able to get out of the pocket a little bit more is going to be a huge help, because as we saw last year, Pittsburgh's offensive line they let a lot of guys go coming into last year. Their offensive line was one of the worst graded offensive lines by PFF. And I feel like, at least Trubisky's got a little bit of mobility and is willing to push the ball down the field a little bit more. Does make more mistakes, at least from the limited work that he's had so far in his career. But I don't think it's a terrible signing. For me personally, I feel like if I'm the front office of the Steelers, I mean, do they feel like they're not good enough to compete in the AFC? Is that why they sort of went this route? Or
yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that he is probably not the future. I hope for him, because I agree with you. I feel like he hasn't had the right shot. I feel like he's gotten dealt a bad hand of cards in Chicago, and I feel like he deserves another shot. But I feel like this is going to be problematic in Pittsburgh. I mean, you just said it earlier, like the offensive line is pretty bad, and Trubisky, if he doesn't have his first read, or if he's, pressured quickly, he panics and he makes a lot of mistakes. Like we saw that back in Chicago when the first read wasn't there, or when, people started chasing after him, like he started scrambling, he started making poor decisions, and that's where some crazy interceptions came from. So Trubisky is someone that I want him to be good. I want him to, potentially be the future for the next couple of years on this team. But I really just see that offensive line being a huge barrier for him because of his decision-making skills. Like when he's under pressure, he just has none. He just doesn't have any. He doesn't have it when he's under pressure, and that's going to be a big problem in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, unless they address the offensive line. Scott, how do you feel about Trubisky in Pittsburgh?
Well, and both of you are correct. I mean, going again, ironically, we're going Eagle-centric in this, but they all but beat us in that playoff game, and that could have taken that trajectory for him, Matt Nagy, that whole team into a different direction.
Yeah, they should have beat us in that game.
I mean, that was, it is, and, we were playing with house money the next game, and woulda, coulda, shoulda. That, Alshon makes that catch, Eagles probably win that Super Bowl, but we're going to let that go. But no, I mean, at the same time, yeah, he was drafted a lot higher than he should have been. I mean, there's another guy we're going to talk about in a second that he was drafted ahead of. And there's another quarterback out there that is considered the best in the league that he was drafted ahead of. And that's a lot of pressure to be put on somebody. And yes, in a situation where offensively he was supposed to be the guy, the mobile quarterback type thing, prototype new NFL. And they were a defensive first team, and it just didn't work out. Seeing him in Pittsburgh, it's an upgrade over Ben from last year, but it's not an upgrade over, historically one of the him and Bradshaw are going to be the two biggest in that town. Offensively, again, if you're a Najee Harris owner, you are probably just, raising the roof right now because you know that you don't have a quarterback maybe in there that you're expecting to take over and dominate, where he's a guy who's came right out and gangbusters and looked amazing. Another Alabama running back coming right in and just owning it. But to see Trubisky there, I think if they give him the opportunity to do a little bit. Now, offensively, like you say, the O-line's bad. There's some depth in the draft. There could be a guy that they sign. They have some cap space this year to just try to solidify it a little bit, because if it's him,
they can solidify a little bit, but this offensive line, if they want to jump into at least a good offensive line, like a top half offensive line in the NFL, like this is not like a 1 year thing. Like this is a multi-year build of this offensive line. So it's going to be bad for the next couple of years.
True. And we saw that a little bit, like you say, with last year and everything else. Now, is he going to be decent? He's probably going to be a top 20, 25 quarterback, depending on how things go. But at the end of the day, he's not going to take that franchise to the next level. But I mean, I always look on an NFL level, I look at Pittsburgh and Baltimore to be the barometers of the league. The rivalry, the way those two play, how things go, they kind of just show you that. Now, is Pittsburgh taking a step back because now Cincinnati's the new team? Yeah, they look to be out of the playoffs for the next few years. Their first round pick at 20, chances are though they probably do go quarterback and try to get that next guy in there. Could it be Kenny Pickett, the Pittsburgh quarterback from Pittsburgh that, that whole thing, the college, they skipped Marino back in the day. That could be that guy. And within a couple of years, they, like you said, they then go deep and maybe make a trade or get somebody to try to get something tangible so that you're not getting sacked 40, 50 times a season.
Yeah. I've heard they're in love with Malik Willis right now, but I don't know.
I don't think he's making it. I think Carolina takes him right away because they're the one. I mean, Baker's out there as a wild card.
How about Detroit? I think Detroit could take him number 2.
That's also possible.
I think that's possible. Jared Goff is not the answer. But
no, he's a statue. He's a mannequin. So you just you dress him up, you give him a teens number, put him out there and have him throwing the football and hope for the best.
All right, so let's move on. We got a few more guys to talk about, and I want to make sure we have time to hit everybody. So we're going to move on to the big trade that just happened a few days ago. Deshaun Watson going to Cleveland. That deal was Watson and a 5th round pick in 2024. Houston got 3 first-round picks this year, which is the 13th overall pick. Next year, 2024, so 3 first, and then they got a 3rd-round pick in 2023 and a 4th-round pick in 2024. And then Cleveland turned around and just completely destroyed all contract etiquette by giving Watson a $230 million fully guaranteed deal, which
most
was
money in history, right?
Yeah, and the sentiment out there is that GMs around the league were very upset at Cleveland for, basically changing the game. Now that Watson has gotten a completely fully guaranteed contract, especially one that large, they kind of feel like this is the route that a lot of quarterbacks are going to go that are signing those second deals. So, we may have seen a shift in the way the NFL does business with this trade. So obviously this being probably the biggest news of the offseason, the Russell Wilson deal was huge. And then all of a sudden this deal sort of broke even that. So Scott, we'll let you jump in on this one first. How do you feel about the Watson trade to Cleveland? And then what do you think it does for the Browns this year?
Well, again, there's currently, I guess, 3 quarterbacks on that roster. I thought I saw they signed Jacoby Brissett to technically be the backup bridge, knowing that there's probably a suspension that's going to come down. And whatever happens with Baker Mayfield, again, there's so many things out there where you need another shoe to drop to see what's really going to happen. I mean, last year, just in fantasy, a lot of people had him on their bench, just waiting to see if he was going to come through and how things are going to work out. The contract thing is obviously non-fantasy related, but how much does he play? Does he play a whole season before they do something? Does he get suspended the first 4 to 6 games? Does the league turn around and try to make an example because of the the lack of off-field things that happen to some of these players based on his transgressions that are still, the legal side is one whole thing. Do they make an example of him and make him sit for another season? I mean, again, they don't care if it affects the Browns, but for us in fantasy, how relevant is he going to be? It's still going to be hard to tell if he gets a full season, half a season, a quarter season, as far as suspensions go. And that's a big factor. Now, whether or not they were running that offense through Nick Chubb and the running game because of inadequacies with Baker Mayfield, that's one whole thing. They can continue to grind it out on that level no matter what. If he's there, Watson, sure, he gives them that dynamic. It might take a minute to shake some rust off if he gets a normal season. And he didn't really get too involved, obviously, last year. And who's he throwing to? You have Donovan Peoples-Jones is on that roster who shows you flashes, but is he going to be an alpha wide receiver? Who knows? Do they re-sign Landry? There's whispers that could happen now that Deshaun's there. Who knows? Do they reach out to Odell and say, hey, come back or go through
Cooper?
Yeah, they traded for Cooper.
Oh God, that's right. Yeah. Well, he'll stop showing up probably in the fourth quarter when he doesn't get a look from the quarterback. But we saw that with Dallas. But yes, no, he's a number one wide receiver who maybe gets a little bit better. But overall, I don't know if I really don't know what to tell you on his level, if he's going to be as involved as people hope, let alone as the Cleveland Browns hope. But if he makes the team better, yeah, to say it's a massive upgrade is an understatement at quarterback, and, with some toys to play with compared to what he had in Houston post Hopkins, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, Watson going to Cleveland obviously he's probably going to be suspended. Like, if he's going to be suspended for at least 4 games, if not more. I'm honestly frustrated because if they're suspending Calvin Ridley for a full season, betting on a game, and Deshaun Watson with what he did, and he's getting suspended for like 6 games, it kind of makes me a bit frustrated, but that's a different conversation. But Deshaun Watson, I feel like when he comes, I feel like people are going to have too high of expectations for the start of his season, whenever it is, because he's missed like a year and a half of football. There's been a lot of mental repercussions of what he's done over this past offseason, what people may think of him now, adjusting to the new locker room. Like, there's so many things that are going on around him right now that a slow start for his season has to be expected. And I feel like it's not going to be. I feel like people are going to expect him to jump in, be immediately a top 5 quarterback right where he left off. And I feel like we should not expect that. So I feel like he's going to be overhyped a little bit for fantasy purposes when that time comes, when he starts playing. But when he gets acclimated, when he's good to go, Amari Cooper is going to be a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. I mean, I'm just 100% in on Amari Cooper. I mean, there's just nobody around there to trust. I mean, they brought in Amari Cooper for a reason. They traded for him, even with his deadly cap hit. Like, they traded for him for a reason, and they're going to release Austin Hooper. This offense is just setting up to be built around Amari Cooper as the clear dominant number 1 wide receiver, and volume is king in fantasy football. So follow the volume, and that's good. That's good. It's all going to be going to Amari Cooper. And the Browns can be a run heavy team, but you got to expect them to pass a decent chunk more when they have Deshaun Watson rather than Baker Mayfield, right? You have to expect an uptick in pass attempts.
Yeah, you don't sign that guy to hand the ball off.
Especially if you're giving him a fully guaranteed $230 million contract. Like, you're going to let this guy throw the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think the Browns are going to either sign or draft another receiver.
I do see Will Fuller. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are saying that they think that Fuller would come back to play with Watson again. And
I've seen some reports saying they're connected right now.
Yeah, and I think that would be perfect because you've got Cooper, who's the possession type wide receiver, and then Fuller, who's more of your take the top off, the defense type of guy. Although they do have Anthony Schwartz.
A nice athletic tight end in Njoku, which is great.
Yes, and Harrison Bryant, who when called upon to be a pass catching weapon was pretty good. I mean, I don't think he's an elite pass catching tight end, but he was good enough to sort of shoulder the load when asked to do that. So yeah, I think the Browns offense is definitely going to obviously be it can't be worse. I shouldn't say that. I don't believe it's going to be worse
Can't be
than
too
it
much
was.
worse than it was.
Right. I mean, it's you're bringing in a guy who is, light years better than the quarterback that you had last year, and that's not a slight on Baker Mayfield. That's just, that's the truth. Watson is clearly one of the most talented quarterbacks, and maybe again, we haven't seen him in over a year, but possibly maybe the most talented quarterback in the league with between his arms and his legs and everything. He's just that kind of elite talent. So I think that the Browns offense should be better again once, like you said, once he gets acclimated to the team and the other players and everything. And then again, that suspension looming possibly in the forefront. But
you have to expect a suspension of some sort. If you're out there right now listening to this and you think that Watson isn't going to get a suspension, you're crazy. I mean, Watson, after what has happened, there's no way the NFL is just going to let him walk in and play football for a full season. There's going to be repercussions here.
I do think that there's a slight possibility that, I know in the legal world, it's a little bit different, but there's a term called, time served, and they will, they'll basically say like, you're going to forgo jail time because you've already spent, 6 months in jail awaiting trial. So that was technically your sentence. And there's a chance, I believe anyway, that there's a chance that the NFL says, they didn't find enough to criminally indict you on any charges. You've already sat out a year, although he did get paid for that entire year. So that wasn't really a suspension, but I think that there's a chance that they could not only, not suspend him because of, again, that time served, so to speak, but also because, without any criminal charges, it's really hard to justify suspending somebody, because now basically what you're saying is anyone who gets accused of anything, whether they get found guilty or not, is subject to, suspension. Now, I think that if the league did their own investigation and found, that there was some truth that, maybe the legal system, the justice system didn't find, then maybe that's something that they could sort of lean on and say, well, we found this and we're going to suspend you based on the league's personal conduct policy. But without there being any actual charges brought against him, I think that he actually could potentially countersue the league for any lost, wages, basically, for an unjust suspension. But I don't think it'll get that far. But I'm just saying, whenever you're thinking about making a decision like that, especially from, Roger Goodell's standpoint, who, the guy, he was a lawyer before he became the commissioner of the NFL. So, there's always those sort of next level thinking that you kind of have to get yourself into, as far as if we do make this decision, what are the potential repercussions on us? And I think that there's a small, but albeit a chance there that Watson doesn't see a suspension this year. That's just my personal belief. I don't know if it's going to happen. We just had some big moves happen today. The next three guys that we're going to talk about: Matt Ryan was traded to the Indianapolis Colts for a third-round pick, the 82nd pick overall. And, it seems like the Colts feel like, again, this is one of these situations where you see these moves happen. And when we talked about this a little bit with Washington, you see these moves happen and you sort of connect the dots and you kind of figure out, okay, does Indianapolis feel like Matt Ryan gives them a chance to win now? And for this one, I think the answer is yes. I think that trading for a guy who's at the back end of his career, who's, still a very solid quarterback. He's not, a Deshaun Watson or a Russell Wilson, but he's still a very capable, very good quarterback. I think he's going to help that offense run a lot more efficiently. And I think that the Colts kind of see that division as theirs for the taking, with a guy like Matt Ryan under center. Hutch, what do you feel about the Ryan trade?
I mean, I agree with you that he could win now, but what has really scared me away from Matt Ryan is seeing him without Julio Jones, especially over these past couple of years. Like, it's been pretty rough, especially for fantasy purposes. Like, if you go to last year when Calvin Ridley was having his ginormous breakout season, and you look at the splits of where Julio was gone and where Calvin Ridley was number one, Calvin Ridley had great fantasy stats. But Matt Ryan was horrifically bad for fantasy football. and like he was just playing awful. And last year, I mean, he was not a great quarterback this year either. But I think he's better than Carson Wentz. I think he gives them a better chance to win than Carson Wentz. And, he has a great running game around him with Jonathan Taylor, which he didn't have for much in Atlanta, especially the past few years. And he gets a really solid number one in Michael Pittman. I think the Colts are going to look either to draft or free agency even for a number 2 wide receiver because, with Jack Doyle retiring, like they just don't have anybody outside of Michael Pittman right now that's trustworthy. So they're going to look somewhere for another wide receiver. And yeah, I think Matt Ryan could absolutely lead this team to the playoffs, but I just don't think Matt Ryan takes this team to a Super Bowl like he did with Atlanta. I just don't see that happening this year.
Yes and no. I don't think Wentz had a shot to take him last year, and I don't think Rivers had a shot the year before. And I know they're on quarterback 6 in the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously, the Andrew Luck thing really threw that franchise for a loop back in the day, and that's you didn't get protection for your quarterback back in the day, and their offensive line still has some issues here and there sometimes. But to see a quarterback of his caliber, and I think he's quietly been underrated a little bit. Yeah, he's long in the tooth. He's 36, 37 years old. I mean, yes, last year he didn't have, and you're right, he did not have any Julio. He didn't really have Ridley. It was Kyle Pitts or bust. He kind of
Russell Gage was pretty good. He had a solid season.
He did. Yeah. He had a couple down the stretch where he was, I joked with Pat earlier and I said, he's going to be your MVP for your playoffs. And he did. And then he had a couple stinkers, but at the same time, I think he was still trying to get used to being that top guy. For what Ryan gives you at quarterback, I mean, he just missed 4,000 yards again by 32 yards last year. That would have been 11 straight years. He's one of your all-timers across the board in stats. Again, a new look, a new franchise with Pittman, with some cap space, with the ability. They don't have a lot of draft picks because they've been moving around a lot recently, but you're talking about maybe sign another name. Zach Pascal just left them for the Eagles today. Speaking of moves today, who was a guy who was familiar with the playbook and the offense there. If they go out and get somebody to help him, that's great. I mean, they need to run that team through Jonathan Taylor. They know that. The game against Jacksonville when they missed the playoffs, I don't even think he carried the ball 20 times that game. And that was one of those deals where if he gets it 20 times, 100 yards, they're guaranteed to win. Some of that is coaching. Some of that was Wentz and Jacksonville just saying, hey, the heck with it. We're just coming at you. But to see Ryan on a new team with better total offensive weapons, so to speak, obviously Pitts is going to be great for Atlanta, whoever steps in. I know Mariota's there, which that sounds like another team that's going to look to take one of these quarterbacks possibly, or still has a little flexibility to make a move. Maybe they want somebody like a Baker Mayfield. Maybe your Jimmy G goes to Atlanta. And again, he's a viable top 15 NFL quarterback. It's still early. I mean, with all these moves that we've seen, that's one thing. But Matt Ryan on Indianapolis, I think it makes them a better team. But we talked about at the beginning, the AFC West having a potential 4 playoff teams just in that division. It's going to be hard. It's going to be real hard for the Colts. And, quietly, who knows what Doug brings to Jacksonville. Tennessee's the lead in that division right now. It's going to be tough, but a Super Bowl in the next year or two, at least it gives them a good quality name and a quarterback that if they do draft somebody, bring somebody in young, let alone I know they have Ellinger right now. Maybe he's not the future, but it's somebody who can bridge that gap for a year or two and teach somebody how to be a true NFL all-timer at quarterback.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that would be a smart move either in the next, in this year, maybe next year, bring in a young quarterback, try to develop behind Matt Ryan.
Yeah, he definitely does. Can down the road and wait for Arch Manning to come out, and then then it'll be set. They'll probably be bad enough by then.
Yeah.
Too.
All right. So you had mentioned, Scott. You had mentioned Marcus Mariota. He right after the Matt Ryan trade, they instantly went out and signed Mariota. That contract was probably still wet from the printer. By the time he signed that, but how do you feel about Mariota in Atlanta?
It's Chip Kelly's white whale. Back in the day, we wanted him, and ironically, the two of those quarterbacks are those two quarterbacks. They were that draft, and it was Winston going and all that stuff. So it's kind of funny that they're revisited. I mean, Jameis Winston has another guy who's never been considered an elite NFL quarterback by any stretch, but he's got stretches of play where, my God, 50 touchdown. Like this guy's 5,000 yards. Like this guy's weird. Like when it comes to the NFL, and he's a guy that can maybe give you something legit with the Saints, with an offense that has a lot of moving parts. Does Michael Thomas stay? Yeah. Okay. Hopefully he could be on the move. Kamara, this could be that make or break. Does he lose a step year physically? Who knows? They have to let a few guys go. They're not going to be able to re-sign everybody. Their cap hit was horrible. Now they're trying to make that work. I think Winston is obviously the better play. Mariota, I really don't know what he gives you. I mean, he was passable fantasy wise. He was meh, with Tennessee back in the day. And then you sit behind Derek Carr for a few minutes. That's fine. But what is he going to bring Atlanta? Is he going to help to, again, bridge the gap? Is he really being brought in to almost back up? I didn't see what his deal was, but is he going to bridge the gap if you did make a trade for another quarterback to be a solid backup? Again, knowing if you got Jimmy G, he gets hurt a lot. Baker could be coming off a tough surgery. Like, what do you do with that? Or do they draft somebody and have him just kind of hold the reins, like a Sammy Sleeves kind of guy, and maybe they dump him at the beginning? I don't think Mariota helps that team a lot. I mean, it's, again, to say he's better than Matt Ryan with one arm is probably not good. But at the same time, he's never been that guy. We had a lot of hype around him, but it was just part of that. He was a product of that college offense, and it just never translated to the pros. I think the Winston going back to New Orleans, it's actually a good move for them. And they're going to have a new coaching staff, everything in place, similar, but different. It's not Sean Payton's offense. We'll see how that goes. But down deep, I know they're worried. Oh, Arthur Smith is back with Mariota. I don't see them ripping off like 13 wins by having Mariota at their quarterback. Fantasy wise, again, if they maybe re-sign Cordarrelle Patterson, he really was so dynamic. He was that unsung hero for everybody's roster last year. Kyle Pitts, he's going to be my maybe only keeper, who quietly had a good year NFL wise, but was a little hit or miss until the end with fantasy. Maybe there's some stuff there, but again, Ridley being out for the year, that's another killer for them. So we'll see. And Gage is gone. Gage went to Tampa Bay. So, who's going to be that next guy to step up, or do they draft somebody?
Yeah, Atlanta with Marcus Mariota, they're not going to be winning any games. I mean, Marcus Mariota is not really going to win many games, especially with their wide receiver core and where it's at right now. I feel like we should expect Atlanta to either draft a wide receiver, because I don't know if they really want to trade for one at this point. I feel like they're going to want to draft one, and then maybe in 2023 look for a quarterback, or this year just straight up. Because the thing is now, like with the Colts committing to Matt Ryan, with like a few quarterback needy teams have committed to some quarterbacks, like the Commanders, right? Like the Colts with Matt Ryan. Like there are a few teams that's locked up quarterbacks. So there are only like a couple teams that really need quarterbacks. So Matt Ryan,
Seattle, and then they're like two
Seattle, Atlanta, Carolina. Like there's only a few teams. So maybe Atlanta maybe trades up, gets Malik Willis, and wants him to develop and be their future quarterback potentially. So it's either going to be receiver or quarterback. But I want to lean receiver, because there's just no way that you can go into a season with that type of receiving core. Like there's just absolutely nobody there. And you want to support Kyle Pitts and make him your future, because you don't need to get an elite receiver. You need to get somebody that can at least be a number 2 next to Kyle Pitts. You don't need to get like a DK Metcalf or like anybody like that. You just need somebody
you don't like Olamide Zacchaeus, who has always been that.
Yeah, no, yeah, he is not someone that can step up as number 1. But you need to get somebody in there, but you also need to fix your quarterback situation. So it'll be interesting, because I think they could just draft a receiver, let Marcus Mariota start this year, wait till 2023. And if Marcus Mariota doesn't work out, they pick one of these elite quarterbacks. No matter which way they go, they're probably going to be a bad team. The receiving core is weak. Like they're going to be a bad team.
I think that's exactly the route that they were going to go, because with Matt Ryan's dead money on the cap this year,
it's so much. Yeah, it's
why would they draft a quarterback? I mean, not that quarterbacks even cost a lot, but they still are, with the salary scale that they have for draft picks, they still are going to end up paying a rookie quarterback a lot of money. And like, why would you do that? Like, I feel like Atlanta sort of used Mariota as a Band-Aid on, somebody cutting off their arm. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to trade Matt Ryan. We're going to, kind of look towards the future, but we're going to sign Mariota to sort of appease the fans and make it look like we're trying to, that we had this kind of plan in place the whole time. And Arthur Smith and Mariota go back to their days in Tennessee, and this sort of like a pacification of the Atlanta fans with the Mariota deal. As far as the Jameis Winston re-signing, again, I think the biggest thing with Winston is, we only saw him for basically 6.5 games last year. I think he played fairly well in those 6 games. He had a couple of really good games, obviously week 1 against the Packers when he threw for 5 touchdowns. He has that in him. And I think that the Saints did a really good job with re-signing Winston. I think, like you said, Scott, with Kamara still there, with Michael Thomas coming back, and apparently from what I'm hearing, the beef that he sort of had with the organization was sort of directed mostly at Sean Payton. So now that Payton is out of there, maybe Thomas is a little bit more inclined to sort of get back to his 2019, maybe not that good, but that early career form for Michael Thomas. And I think that bringing Thomas back or having Thomas back and having him, sort of buy into, the offense this year and buy into the team. I think that Winston could potentially be a really, I don't want to say a good quarterback for fantasy. I think he could be a very good streaming option this year, because there's definitely going to be times like when they're playing the Falcons, there's going to be games that the NFC is by far the weaker conference now, with all of the good quarterbacks going to the AFC. So as far as, trying to keep this a little bit in the fantasy realm, I think that Winston's a guy who, I might be throwing on some of my benches at the end of drafts just to sort of stream during these weeks where, they're playing some of these weaker NFC teams, and Winston could have another 4 or 5 touchdown game. So I like the signing with Winston. Mariota, again, I feel like that's a bridge, but
yeah.
Hutch, how do you feel about Winston? You haven't really.
Oh yeah, Winston. Yeah, I didn't really mention, but Winston. I think it's a solid signing for the team. I mean, it's a cheap quarterback, because I feel like, I don't know. I feel like because they can try to win now, but I feel like it's not going to be successful with Winston. I feel like he's just not that guy. And I feel like within the next couple of years, I mean, Scott was mentioned earlier with Kamara potentially falling off, with Thomas, he is getting older. They're not going to be able to bring back everybody this year. Their cap situation's pretty awful right now. I feel like the Saints are soon going to just absolutely collapse and just go into a full rebuild. But I feel like they have like 1 or 2 more years where they can try to win with Winston. And that's a good thing, because they're going to try to be competitive, which means Winston will have a better, will be driven to score more fantasy points, throw for more yards, throw for more touchdowns. He's going to be trying to win games. And I think Winston could end up being a quarterback 2 in a super flex league if you really want one. If you want to go deeper for your quarterback 2, you can do that. And for some games, you could stream, because he's a guy that we've seen be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. We've seen him have games with 4 or 5 touchdowns. So he's someone that can absolutely have some big weeks for you in fantasy. You just want to keep an eye on him.
Yeah. And just to circle back real quick, I think the way that offense could go, if you combine all 3 New Orleans quarterbacks, just fantasy, again, looking at like points again, just in our league of record, you would have been hovering around Kirk Cousins, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts stats. Now, he didn't have a full season. We know Taysom Hill gives you a little bit more of a dual threat dynamic, and Trevor Siemian is Trevor Siemian. He's got, like you just said, 2, super flex, a 2 quarterback league concept. Yeah, he's definitely going to be there. He's got top 12 potential with the offense around him. It's just a matter of healthy consistency. Does Marquez Callaway come into what we thought he was going to be last year, plus a Michael Thomas, Kamara, who plays maybe at a high level for another year? Because they are probably going to look to push all in, knowing the amount of moves that they have to make and to get over that hump. Their window is closing faster. I mean, they've been a bridesmaid in the NFC for years, going back to 2016, 17, 18. They've always been behind everybody. And yeah, I get Michael Thomas has beef. I'd be pissed too if he had Taysom Hill throwing me balls, especially in the playoffs. I wouldn't want to play. And then you lose Drew Brees, which is obviously a whole thing in and of itself. But yeah, I think Winston will be underrated. He'll be floating around. He'll be like your old Matt Stafford that used to be on the waiver wire, and you pick, should I pick him up? Maybe, maybe not. And then he gets hot and ends up as a top 10 quarterback. He's got the potential. It's just what they're going to be able to put around him and protect him on that level. But that offense runs through Kamara. If he's on, he's on. If he's not, then they don't have a second bell cow or dual threat guy there.
Yeah, it is pretty true. Yeah.
Wow, man, we went through that pretty extensively there in a pretty short amount of time. I think that hitting these quarterback moves sort of is like setting the table for dinner. We're definitely going. Scott and I know, are going to get into some of the other moves moving forward here into April. We're going to hit a little bit of the NFL draft. Do a little predictions on where guys are going to go. And, it seems like a lot of the quarterback moves that we were talking about today, that we all seem to think that there's going to be a lot of wide receivers taken in the first round of the draft or near the top of the draft, first, second round. And, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of these teams, like you said, with the moves they're making, it seems like they're definitely pushing all in with these quarterback moves. So, getting some extra talent around them is going to be pretty important. Hutchinson, thank you for coming on, man. Again, if you want to follow him on Twitter, he is at.
You want me to say it?
Yes.
I don't
want to mess it up. I don't want to mess it up.
I got it. At TYFM NFL.
I knew that. See, that's what I was going to say.
Or if you search up Hutchinson Brown, I'll come up as well. But that's just my handle.
But honest to God, like your name is great, and you sound like you should be like an offensive tackle out of Alabama, drafted in the top 5. I swear to God, dude, it's awesome. By the way, it's so much fun following you on Twitter and everything. And you are, you always, for when you get older, it's always, if I knew then what I knew now. Pat and I've been doing fantasy for a long time, and then the technology comes on board, and we're like, oh, maybe we could do that. Yeah. What you're doing now, pal, you are knocking it out of the park. Please continue on for all of us. You're great. You're really great. And we appreciate having you on, man. Thank you very much.
Oh man, I really do appreciate that. That means a lot. I'm super happy to come on the show. It was super fun.
All right, we'll be in touch maybe later this year, pal. We can go back and talk about how we screwed these calls up or that's usually I figure out what I screwed up and Pat's like, oh yeah, well, obviously,
Yeah, man. Thanks again for coming on. And that's going to do it for tonight. And we'll see you guys probably in another few weeks.
Peace.
We'd like to sincerely thank you for listening to the show. You can follow us on Twitter at the 9Route1 and at Scott from Delco. We put out a lot of funny and informative information on there. Our email address, if you'd like to email the show, is the 9routeFFB@gmail.com. Make sure to click the little plus wherever you're listening to follow the show. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review. We'll be back next week with more fantasy football info to take your team deep here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.